in this space. We've gathered together some of the greatest intellectual minds in the world in this space. That we can have conversation, and then beyond conversation, move into action as we honor our prince, our warrior, our father, our lover of people. As we honor him today, we honor ourselves. So when we pour libations, we understand that we're not worshiping ancestors, for we only worship the one and true living God, but we do recognize that we are inextricably connected to the ancestors. That by virtue of calling their names and pouring water into a plant, we are reminded of the life that they lived and the obstacles that they faced and the victories they overcame. And then we are encouraged that we are inextricably connected to children that we don't know, who have not been born. That is our responsibility to build healthy relationships with one another, to build institutions like the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, so that those who come after us will have something. So when we pour libations, we're looking at life as circular and not linear. We are inextricably connected to our ancestors. We are inextricably connected to and responsible for the children who come after us. So we're going to say simply inside. Some people say ashe, because libations is poured throughout the continent of Africa, which has thousands of languages, many traditions, customs, and ways of being.
The Liberation Film Series is co-sponsored by Michigan State University's African American and African Studies program in co-partnership with the Charles Wright Museum of African American History. A community member, Charles Farrell, brought the idea to both of us and thought that it was a great way to promote Black liberation history, the history of Black liberation, a rich and vibrant history, and bring that to the Detroit and Michigan community.
My name is Charles Ezra Farrell. I'm the founder and director of the Liberation Film Series at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. This is a very important series, as the museum is the world's largest African American museum in the world. We conceptualized the museum as being the center hub of our community and connected with the Black study departments within the region as well as nationally to bring in scholars and community activists to have a very meaningful conversation with the community after watching the movie.
This film series has done an excellent job in using the medium of film to teach African history, to open ideas and to raise questions that people need to know about our history and our culture.
The Black Liberation Film Series, for me, captures, I think, a very important aspect of what Black studies actually is.
There's a little bit of an amnesic aspect to culture when you really have gaps in history. So we really want to fill in some gaps by covering some of the more potent aspects of our history, starting off with the Black Power mixtape with Angela Davis and some hidden footage from Stokely Carmichael, and really having Dr. Gloria House and Stephen Ward come into our community. Both are very strong activists and historians, to really kind of relate the story in a more meaningful way to the community.
The film that I saw was the Black Power mixtape. I once saw it before coming here, but I wanted to check it out, and it was a very different experience. Watching it with people who went through those particular struggles in Detroit and hearing the different the memories of those people who experienced it versus how students who study that, how they understand the history.
When someone asks me about violence, I just find it incredible, because what it means is that the person who's asking that question has absolutely no idea what Black people have gone through, what Black people have experienced in this country.
In the 1960s and 70s, Swedish filmmakers arrived in America to explore the Black Power movement, which the U.S. media saw as a violent threat.
We're making a revolution by educating the people to the fact that they should arm themselves for self-defense.
If any racist dog policemen attack us, we will defend ourselves because we are bent on surviving.
30 years later, in the cellar of a Swedish television station, an amazing collection of unseen interviews was discovered with some of the greatest revolutionary minds in modern history.
There wouldn't be an America if it wasn't for Black people. We hold America to our bosom.
When you get tired enough, it's when you want to sacrifice everything.
Get ridiculed and discriminated and be less than a man.
It's a question of dignity and decency.
My husband didn't make enough money because he was Negro.
We were moved and motivated and charged up by people who had already made a commitment to bring about change.
Fight for liberation, oh yeah!
Dr. King is a great man and he's very patient. Unfortunately, I am from a younger generation. I am not as patient nor am I as merciful.
Black is beautiful, but black isn't power. Knowledge is power.
It really illustrates how the Black Power was a national and international movement.
From 1965 to 1967, I lived in Alabama and worked with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Lowndes County. Lowndes County was had a history of extreme violence. It's a situation, it was a political environment in which 95% of the black people who lived there did not own their own property and worked as sharecroppers, and the other 5% of the population owned almost all of the land. And it had been that way since the Civil War and Reconstruction. And beginning in Reconstruction, whites in Lowndes had carried out an ongoing and unrelenting campaign of violence against African Americans there to ensure that they not participate in the political process within that county. So African Americans had, because of this brutality, because of this history of violence, had pretty much decided simply to work to educate their children and to maybe help them go to Atlanta or further north or whatever to get a higher education and try to create better lives for themselves through the educational process, which was also a segregated process.
Finally got the news, we were able to enlist the support of General Baker Jr., a revolutionary from Detroit, who was actually in the League of Revolutionary Black Workers with John Bracey, eminent historian from UMass Amherst.
I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that as the automotive industry goes, so goes the city of Detroit. So goes this country, more or less. Naturally, we lose money when we are not working. So it's the best. Getting along certainly eliminates the lost time that is not necessary as far as we are concerned.
We get ready! We get ready! We get ready! We get ready!
When the drum organization was created, and we had our first strike, and out of the first strike, nobody knew what to do with this strike because it had a different character. This wasn't the strikes of the 30s. 3,000 black workers in the street and didn't know what to do with them. And that's the honest truth. I don't want you thinking that you're just gonna go call something and it's gonna happen. The world don't work like that. Matter of fact, you better be careful what you call for because somebody might answer. Right. So we're standing here with conga drums at the gate, beating on conga drums, and the state troopers climb on top of the Hamtramck plant with high-powered rifles aimed at us in the back of the alley. The Hamtramck Police Department started moving in from the north with the double-edged axe handles, and the Detroit police got us in a pincher movement coming from the other side.
When I look at finally got the news, it's the same thing. When you look around at Detroit and you see the blight and you see the conditions that it is, there's a whole historical legacy of revolutionary thought that sought to bring a Marxist class analysis, right, to the problems of racism in the labor force. So there's one, that's how Black Studies functions, you know, from the textbook to the real world.
What we did was something that worked 40 years ago. And I have no illusions that I have any answers to what people ought to do today. You see the world from a different place than I do. You see different problems, you know, you can probably handle all the technology I can't even turn on, right? And you're gonna have to figure that out. All we can tell you is what we did, right? The mistakes we made, the gains we made, the things that we tried, whether they worked or didn't work. But that's giving you ammunition for your own fight. It's not, you can't substitute for your fight.
In 1965, Jerry Moore, a folk singer, asked for permission to set the poem to music.
To preserve his rights as the author, Randall printed the poem as a broadside press publication. This marked the beginning of a major cultural era in African American poetry. Randall said, "The seeming disadvantages of black writers were in reality opportunities. Because they had less chance of being corrupted or distracted by success, they could devote themselves to the solitary labor of writing. They should develop their own media publishing houses." For Malcolm was the first book planned by Randall's Broadside Press, and this book foreshadowed the profile of the press, as the anthology contains poets from different generations, divergent political perspectives, and a broad range of literary styles. Broadside became the foremost poetry press of the Black Arts Movement, which was an outgrowth of the Civil Rights Movement, a resurgence that characterized cultural activism.
On the waterfront, a really potent story in Highland Park, which deals with the emergency manager fiasco that resulted in high-cost water bills, and this was really a global issue.
During the waterfront video, residents are saying, well, we're getting water bills that are $3,000, $4,000 for 3 months. How is that possible? And so these are the kinds of questions, those issues are not brought into the classroom, but these are issues that manifest themselves uniquely in certain kinds of communities. So you have students, by getting them actually out of the classroom, by getting them involved in the kinds of issues that are kind of contemporary issues, what you see is that all of a sudden education doesn't become something that's very abstract. You see that what you're studying, the concepts, the theories that you're learning about, the ideas that you're learning about are very relevant to our community.
Try to live without water for 3 days. Try it. And you talking about people gonna be missing you around because you cannot live. Most of your body is water. So this is a great challenge, but we have never had to face this before, thinking that you will be challenged today around your whole ability to have water. We grew up being taught that water is what? Free. And then we quickly, as we became adults, we found out that water is not free. Everything that was produced during the time that Henry Ford produced, founded his factory and that type of stuff, like the infrastructure that was placed at that time, homes for the workers and what have you, have been decaying. And it's not just Highland Park. It's the same thing in Detroit.
Mr. Waterman, Mr. Waterman, please don't turn my water off today.
This little bitty hamlet, 20, 30 years ago, had 60, 61,000 people that lived in that city.
I had the responsibility of taking whatever steps are necessary to get the city financially healthy again.
Every time I get a bill, it's up $2,000, $2,000, $2,000. For what?
Members of the Hip Hop Nation often think of hip hop as more than something that you see on BET. They think of it as an identity, a worldview, and a way of life. Hip hop means a lot to hip hop heads. It's no joke, it's serious to them, it's important to them.
We're like in this box. In order to be in that box, you have to be strong, you have to be tough, you have to have a lot of girls, you gotta have money, you gotta be a player or a pimp. You know, you got to be in control. You have to dominate other men, other people. You know, if you're not any of those things, then, you know, people call you soft or weak or a pussy or a chump or a faggot. And nobody wants to be any of those things. So everybody stays inside the box. I heard Suge Knight say one time that hip-hop is a man's game. And it is.
Before hip-hop, men were seeming in R&B, they was like very docile, you know what I mean? But when hip-hop came around, it brought masculinity back into the game. Now some of it is a little misguided.
1 second we're killing each other, next minute
We're pimping hoes. We're doing everything wrong. That's bananas.
Through rap music, I think there's an identification with some of the most stereotypical masculine standards.
We need to come to terms with the reality of the frailty that is part of what it means to be a black man. And I just want to expand that. It's part of what it means to be a human being. This sexism and misogyny are not only dehumanizing and objectifying to black women, they are dehumanizing to the black men who practice it, right? This notion of being hard, of manning up, of being the man involves in emotional dehumanization that is not what we want as a community for black men. We want black men to be fully human. And being fully human means that we're allowed to be vulnerable. And boy, oh boy, do black men have a lot of vulnerability. Black men are suffering. Why can't we allow black men to suffer and heal in a fully human way? Why do we have to tell them to shut up and man up when they're hurting, right? So we have a challenge within the community, not just in terms of how we treat black women, but in terms of how we treat black men.
I didn't know very much about Du Bois initially. I happened to take a leave from the department to work for the chancellor, and he asked me to be in charge of the papers. And since then, I plunged into Du Bois. And he was a genius. And sometimes you will come across his writings and they will blow you completely away.
I can do this the more appropriately because I represent that large group of 14 million Americans, 1/10 of the nation, who, in a sense, explain America's pressing problems.
Everyone seems to have their own Du Bois, but the span of his life and the breadth of his work make that inevitable. Just the facts are stunning. He was the first African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard University, one of the founders of urban sociology. His groundbreaking approach to history writing gave birth to a new school of historians. He founded and edited the first black popular magazine, wrote 20 works of poetry, fiction, political and social inquiry, and memoir.
If you want to read something that applies to 1963, go back and get a volume of The Souls of Black Folks by Du Bois, published in 1903.
This is the doctor. Rather, we progress today, as in the past, by the soul-torn strength of those who can never sit still in silence while the disinherited and the damned clog our gutters and gasp their lives out on our front porches. These are the men who go down in the blood and dust of battle. They say ugly things to an ugly world. They spew the lukewarm French straddlers out of their mouths like God of old. They cry aloud and spare not. They shout from the housetops, and they make this world so damned uncomfortable with its nasty burden of evil that it tries to get good and does get better. Evolution is evolving the millennium, but one of the unescapable factors in evolution are the men who hate wickedness and oppression with perfect hatred, who will not equivocate, will not excuse, and will be heard. With the sainted spirits of such as these, the crisis would weakly but earnestly stand and cry in the world's four corners of the way, and it claims no man as friend who dare not stand and cry with it. 1914. One of the reasons people don't know about Du Bois is because Du Bois was the most persistent critic of America until Malcolm came along. But before Malcolm, it is hard to find any way. And if you look at things that he wrote in the 30s about the culture, it is just as relevant today as it was when he wrote it 80 years ago. buying and selling and merchandise, turning people into commodities. The media in bed with the ruling class. There were 5 corporations that control the media. Have you been abroad? Anybody been out of the country? You go out of the country, you have 48% of the American people who get their news from Fox News. See? Even CNN International is better than CNN here. They don't want you to see Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera just bought Current TV, and Time Warner just cut Current TV loose. They do not want you. When's the last time you saw television coverage of Afghanistan, see, or Iraq, or Israel, our great ally? You don't. Right? You don't. So the news is censored, and it's very difficult to come, as Du Bois did, to come to a relevant analysis of what is going on in the world.
They have asked me to see if I can try to put this film, Sankara and Burkina Faso's experience in universal context. They want me to make the linkages between what went on there between 1983 and 1987 to what is going on here in Detroit.
We see ourselves not divorced as an academic unit from our community, from the Black community in particular, but as an actual extension of that community. And so the Liberation film series captures that by actually having us going into Detroit, working at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And so you see our program there interacting with individuals from Detroit and also actually across the state of Michigan.
Alan's point was that the concept of Black power was transition. It came from the people.
Upper Volta, 1983. Thomas Sankara is brought to power by a coup supported by one of the poorest peoples on our planet. Behind a military uniform and a Marxist discourse, Africa discovers a young and dynamic leader, ready to put his innovative ideas at the service of his fellow citizens. Thomas Sankara gives a new name to his country, Burkina Faso, which means the land of upright men.
We had a full house, and much of the audience had never heard of this individual. But after the film, they were astounded, excited, motivated and inspired by the story of Thomas Sankara, and made that clear and made the connections between West Africa's experiences with Detroit's experiences. And so this was just wonderful dialogue, and I just think it brought out the unique characteristics of this film series that I haven't seen before.
Mumia Abu-Jamal, he's our comrade. He was in the Black Panther Party when he was 16 or 15 years old. Myself, I was 18 in the Black Panther Party. And so we have an affinity for him. But one of the issues, and I like people to consider this when we're watching the film, is not just the issue of innocence, but the issue of what does a Black man do that's legal if the police come to kill you extrajudicially, illegally? Do you have a right to defend yourself against the police when the police come to kill you?
On December 9th, 1981, Officer Daniel Faulkner, Philadelphia Police Department, was fatally shot. Mumia Abu-Jamal was sentenced to death for murder. 15 years later, Mumia Abu-Jamal, one-time radical activist, award-winning journalist, and part-time cab driver, sits on death row.
He was sufficiently coherent enough to say, yeah, I shot the MF, and I hope he dies. Well, he got his wish. Danny died.
I was with Jamal from within a moment or two of him being brought into the emergency room. He neither made any confessions to me, nor did he say anything that would be even remotely in the way of a confession to any other individuals.
No, I did not confess in any hospital.
Is he a political prisoner? Is there a police and justice department cover-up?
And it was Mumia's gun. It was licensed to him. But that gun was a .38 caliber. And the bullet that was removed from Officer Faulkner, if you accept the word of the medical examiner, was a .44 caliber.
The police are the people and the people are the police. The only difference is that we allow them to do certain things.
because the police were created in that segment to protect the people against the military. The police at this particular point are the military. There's no distinction. There is a very, very clear focus that Mumia is all of us, and we are Mumia.
We could not have had a film made by PBS and put into it that America was culpable for Malcolm's assassination, and nobody else has either. HBO did a documentary. There's a man named Lloyd Jowers. Lloyd Jowers owned the grill across from the motel where Martin was killed. The King family brought him to trial. He was found guilty, and unknown government agencies. HBO denies that they ever covered the trial. There were no American journalists there except one journalist from Memphis. One would have thought that a jury, a predominantly white jury that says government agents were involved in the assassination of Martin Luther King would be front page news in this country. 5 corporations control all the media in this country. 5 corporations.
Coming into the city and learning about these different aspects is really important and very useful to kind of see how Detroit has developed. I know a lot of people would go from the rebellion of '67, but it's important to look at how the city has developed and what it looks like now.
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
It described how Malcolm pursued those things that he believed in. And that was regardless of what was going on, even when the forces of the nation and the CIA and God knows whoever else were coming against him, he never relented in his efforts.
I am God having a human experience. Now, some of you laugh because you don't understand it, and some of you are a little sensitive because you're either Christian, Muslims, or other. Every religion explains to you that you are God having human experience. No theology explains it to you, and very few preachers would dare explain it to you because they'd lose their jobs. And so I just want to make it clear, every living thing, every non-living thing is an expression of an aspect of the divine essence having that peculiar experience. That is called African culture. And that is the foundation of this film. When we look at the history of our people and we try to understand why someone has declared war against one race for centuries on centuries, we can't seem to make sense of this thing. It doesn't matter how human we behave, someone is still attacking us. I came to my beautiful Detroit. I've been coming to Detroit for nearly 30-something years. Today was the worst Detroit I've ever seen. This is absolute insanity, what I've experienced in the last 24 to 30-something hours. They have been like somebody dropped a social atomic bomb in the streets of Detroit. And it's happening in other neighborhoods where African Americans are predominant populations.
The one thing that we could say about African peoples is that we left evidence of ourselves all over this planet. And that's the problem with European scientists. The deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets.
You won't find a monument anywhere prior to 1500 that isn't Africoid in some way, shape, or form.
People think Africa and Asia and Guatemala, Southern America, these places were all jungle. Jungle came after the invasions of European colonialism. Then the jungles came in because nobody was manning the land anymore.
I'm an African American. Africa's my race, America's my geopolitical place. I'm not surrendering that to anybody.
The monument that we know is Stonehenge. A European writer by the name of Gerald Massey said in one of his books that Stonehenge was built by an African man named Mauryan.
The letter J, let me say this again. The letter J was not invented until the 1600s. So the reality is, Jesus is not the name of that person.
Science. I think science is somewhere where black people should just take over because it's free of your blackness. The answer is carbon. The answer is 2.7 pi. You can't argue my position with those answers. It's no objectivity to that.
We have a responsibility, folk who are older have a responsibility to connect to our young people, to tell them what is and important, what is and is not important to hold on to. Going to the club is fun, but is it going to change how you feel about yourself? Is it going to edify you to go fight the good fight, to be the next person to pass this baton from your parents to you, potentially to your children? What are those things that help you do that?
Well, a good context for understanding the value of the Liberation film series comes from Tony K. Bombara's assessment of how the creative imagination has been colonized, that the global screen has been colonized. Media control, as we know it, has the will, the muscle, and the propaganda machine, right, to create this delusional state as to what America even is for most of us. So, therefore, she asked the question, can the world be wrenched away from the psychopaths, right, who control mass media and thus venture to colonize the global image? You know, and ultimately, what role can film play in waging that struggle against that, as well as in eking out a desirable vision of the future?
Part of our mission is to continue to engage the community with our scholarship so that we can transform the community. The Liberation Film Series does that.
The visual element, film in particular, gives another rich avenue, an exciting avenue for communicating the information that I write about.
How do you, as an educator, get more young people to fill these chairs? This series had some heavy topics, and maybe it wasn't the PG-13 type deal, but I'd like to see, something like this done just for kids.
It's hard to bring those kids through the course sometimes because part of our history is very dark and scary. But then we have a part of our history that is absolutely exultant and absolutely celebratory and full of purpose and love and light.
We'd like to thank the university and the students and foremost the community who came out to support this vital film series. Thank you.